Richard Petty is unarguably NASCAR's greatest driver. With 200 career wins spanning from 1959 to 1984, 7 Daytona 500s, and 7 NASCAR Winston Cup Series championships, he has easily solidified his place in NASCAR history. But as his career grew longer and age continued to progress, Petty's performance and his competitiveness began to decline, most notably in the 1980s. From 1980 to 1984, Petty scored a total of 10 wins, going winless in 1982. He finished top 10 in the standings each of those years, with his best finish being 4th, both in 1980 and 1983. But 1985 and 1986 would be 2 disappointing seasons for the King. In those 2 seasons combined, Petty did not win a single race and got 5 top 5s and 24 top 10s combined, finishing 14th in the final standings both those years. But heading into 1987, Richard Petty, Dale Inman, and the entire Petty Enterprises team looked to rebound and have a better year, and they sure did. This is Richard Petty's final competitive season. 1987 started off rather good for Richard Petty, as he started 14th and finished 6th in his Twin 125 qualifier. Petty would then start 11th in the Daytona 500 and led 2 laps on the day. Petty ran up front mostly the entire race and somehow managed to stretch his field just enough to come home and finish 3rd, behind Bill Elliott and Benny Parsons. This 3rd place finish would later prove to be Richard Petty's final top 10 at Daytona. The next week at Rockingham, Petty started 13th and managed to stay out of trouble and finished 15th, 6 laps down. Richmond was the 3rd race of the season, and Petty qualified 15th. By lap 144, Petty was going a lap down when trouble struck right in front of him. Bobby Allison in the number 22 Miller American Buick LeSabre made contact with the number 26 Quaker State Buick LeSabre of Morgan Shepherd. Shepherd slapped the wall, came back across the track, and set off a 9-car wreck. Richard sustained right front damage to his Pontiac and was taken behind the wall. Petty eventually returned to the race, finishing 23rd, 83 laps down. Petty would start 17th at Atlanta and led 1 lap under caution. Petty was even running as high as 5th before being caught up in a late race pileup, finishing 3 laps down and 14th. The next week at Darlington, Petty started way back in 24th. The King had a fast Pontiac that day and was able to lead 1 lap again on the day and bring the number 43 SDP Pontiac home in 3rd, tying the best finish of the season for him at the Daytona 500. Petty led 1 lap the next week at North Wilkesboro and finished 6th, 1 lap down. However, Bristol was the next race, and it was a race that Richard Petty was waiting for a long time. Petty started 18th and once again led 1 lap. Petty ran very consistent that day and drove his car all the way up to 2nd, behind Dale Earnhardt. As the laps wind down, Petty was slowly closing on Earnhardt, but it wasn't enough for Petty to catch Earnhardt, and Richard Petty brought his number 43 STP Pontiac home in 2nd, his best finish of the 1987 season. It was Petty's first 2nd place finish since Atlanta in 1986, also finishing behind Earnhardt. Heading into Martinsville the next week, Petty was sitting 3rd in the Winston Cup standings. Petty started 10th at Martinsville, but would stall in turn 4 on lap 351. Petty would bring the car into the pits a few laps later, and the SDP crew lifted up the hood, and the team brought the 43 behind the wall. Petty would DNF in 22nd with timing chain problems. This was Richard Petty's first DNF of the 1987 season, and this DNF would drop him to 7th in the standings. The next race on the schedule was the Winston 500 at Talladega. Petty started 25th in the field of 41 cars. Petty was still running mid-pack when the field came to lap 22. That is when disaster struck. Bobby Allison, driving the number 22 Miller American Buick LeSabre, was coming into the trial when out of nowhere, his right rear tire exploded. Due to the tire blowout, Allison's car spun backwards and started to become airborne. Allison's car impacted the catch fence at 210 miles an hour, tore down 100 feet of fencing, and nearly got into the flag stand where flagman Harold Kinder was standing. Due to the crash and debris flying everywhere, drivers tried to avoid Allison. Richard Petty was approaching the scene. He swerved to avoid the accident, but Alan Kulwicki spun right in front of him. Petty swerved to avoid Kulwicki, but would end up spinning into the grass himself. 7 more cars were involved in the wreck, and Thankfully, Allison climbed out of the car unharmed, but 5 fans suffered injuries as a result. This crash led to NASCAR to use restrictor plates at future superspeedway races at Daytona and Talladega. Petty wouldn't sustain any major damage, but the cooler in the rear of his car was knocked out. But Petty would return to the track. Later, towards the end of the race, fumes started to fill the cockpit of Petty's car, and Richard became completely overwhelmed by the fumes. He brought his car to the pits and climbed out. Petty laid down and was given oxygen. The Petty Enterprises team got Greg Sacks to relieve Petty for the remainder of the race. Sacks brought the 43 home to a 16th place finish, 5 laps down, and Petty would drop to 5th in points. Petty was eligible to compete in the Winston, as there were not enough previous winners from the year prior and the current season to fill the 19-car field. Petty was able to compete as he was one of the most recent drivers in the field not locked in to win a race, dating back to his 200th win in the 1984 Firecracker 400. Petty qualified 16th, but was taken out in a wreck with Neil Bonnet on lap 66 in turn 3. Petty started 28th in the next week's race, the Coca-Cola 600, and would finish 4th, 2 laps down to his son Kyle, who would lap the entire field. The Budweiser 500 at Dover did not go well for Richard Petty. Richard started 24th, but on lap 71, trouble struck. Going into turn 3, Richard went up the banking and hit the outside wall hard. The impact was so hard that it blew the windshield out of his car. The King also sustained 2 broken ribs, and Richard would DNF in 36th. This wreck would drop Richard Petty from 5th to 8th in the Winston Cup point standings. Pocono was also a difficult race for Richard Petty, as he would sit out of qualifying. Petty had Joe Ruttman qualify the car, and Ruttman would qualify the 43 in 18th. In order to keep his consecutive start streak alive, Petty got into the car on the opening lap, but would come into the pits and give up the seat to Ruttman, just so he can be credited with the start. On lap 172, Ruttman was going into turn 1 when the engine blew, and Ruttman would slip in his own oil, and the STP Pontiac broke loose and impacted the wall with the back end. For the second race in a row, the 43 would DNF, this time in 29th, and would drop to 9th in the points. Heading into the 13th race of the season at Riverside, Petty was still dealing with the 2 broken ribs from his accident at Dover. Once again, Petty tapped Joe Ruttman to qualify the STP Pontiac. Ruttman qualified in 15th, and when the field began their pace laps, Petty once again got behind the wheel to be credited with the start, and Petty once again pulled into the pits and gave the wheel to Ruttman. Petty then went up to the booth to call the remainder of the race with Larry Newberg and Dick Bergman.
Of the brand new cars, Richard, something like the first 5 qualifiers and 6 of the first 10 cars. Well, see what we did over the winter. They went from 3,700-pound cars down to 3,500-pound cars. Well, these cars that we run on the road courses were set up and everything, and we had a couple of 300 pounds in them, and you could meet the right deal on the left and right way and all that stuff. But then when they cut down 200 pounds, some of the cars were too heavy, so a lot of boys went and built new cars.
Ruttman managed to stay out of trouble and brought the 43 home to a 6th place finish. This performance by Ruttman helped the 43 rise to 7th in the points. At Michigan, Richard was healthy enough to get back behind the wheel. He qualified 14th for the Miller American 400. CBS Sports, who was providing coverage of the race, had onboard cameras inside 3 cars, and Richard Petty's car was one of them. During the pace laps, commentator Ken Squire talked to the King over the radio.
Richard Petty, Ken Squire at CBS Control. Do you read us?
Yes, sir, Ken. We're right here.
How do you feel?
Well, right now I feel real good. Talk to me a little bit after we run some.
Okay. Any soreness at all?
Well, yeah, I'm still sore, but I feel like this flat track, we don't get that G-force, should be okay.
Richard, your doctor down there, I understand, told you that you're getting older. You don't do things as well as you used to. You only broke 2 this time.
That's what he said, is that most time I break 4 or 5, so I'm doing better.
Okay. Good luck to you this afternoon, sir.
Halfway into the race, Petty was running strong inside the top 10 when going into turn 1. Rick Wilson, driving the number 4 Kodak Oldsmobile Delta 88, got into the left rear quarter panel of Petty. Petty turned down across Wilson, and nearly spun around. Petty overcorrected and drifted up the racetrack and scraped the outside wall. Petty lost a few spots, but managed to gain it back. He managed to get himself into the top 5 before eventually falling a lap down and finishing 12th to race winner Dale Earnhardt. Next week was the Firecracker 400 at Daytona, and 2 days prior, Petty turned 50 years old. Earlier in February, during the Daytona 500, Petty finished a strong 3rd, and Petty looked to have another good finish at Daytona. Petty qualified 21st and began to move his way up, and halfway through the race, Petty was running as high as 8th, when, with about 30 laps to go, Richard became completely overwhelmed by the Florida heat and pulled into the pits. Petty requested a relief driver, and the Petty Enterprises team got Lake Speed to relieve Petty. Lake Speed fell out of the race earlier on lap 10 due to fuel pump issues. As Richard was cooling off and rehydrating in the pits, Speed was about to exit the pits, but could not get the car started. The crew had to give Speed a push start to get the car going. Speed eventually got back onto the track, but lost a lot of ground. Speed managed to finish in 26th, 5 laps down. Petty was now once again sitting 9th in points. The Summer 500 at Pocono was the 16th race of the season. Richard qualified in 22nd and ran fairly consistent and finished a strong 8th, 1 lap down. The next week at Talladega wasn't a good one for Richard Petty. Petty started 28th, but by the 47th lap, fell out due to a blown engine. Petty DNF'd in 37th, and this finish dropped Petty one more spot in the points to 10th, and this was Petty's 4th DNF of the season. Petty would start 22nd for the Budweiser at the Glen and would finish on the lead lap in 14th. The next 4 races turned out to be a good run for Richard Petty. Petty qualified 20th at Bristol, led 2 laps, and finished 5th, and managed to gain a spot in the points and climb back up to 9th. At the Southern 500 at Darlington, Petty started 14th, and once again led 2 laps. Those 2 laps came on lap 190 and 191, and the fans went to their feet. Rain was coming, and it looked like Petty could win it all if NASCAR threw the caution, but it wasn't meant to be, unfortunately. Dale Earnhardt took the lead from Petty, and the caution for rain did not come out for 10 more laps. Petty finished 3rd. Those 2 laps led by Petty would be the last he would lead all season. This was also Richard Petty's 700th career top 10. Petty started 17th at Richmond. On the 8th lap of the race, his son Kyle made contact with Terry Labonte, setting off a major 14-car wreck coming onto the front stretch. Petty sustained minimal damage and was able to continue. Petty finished a strong 5th. Petty was able to climb up 1 more spot in the points to 8th. At Dover, Petty started 26th. His car wasn't handling right and was running inside and outside the top 10. Petty still brought the 43 home to a 9th place finish, 4 laps down. At Martinsville, Richard qualified 16th, and on lap 72, going into turn 3, the 8 of Bobby Hillin Jr. made contact with the 27 of Rusty Wallace. Richard was entering the turn when Hillin started to spin. Hillin spun right in front of Richard, and Richard hit Hillin and pushed him up the turn. The 52 of Jimmy Means drove straight into the back of Richard, and Jeff Bodine spun trying to avoid the wreck. Richard sustained damage to the front and back of his Pontiac. Petty returned to the track, but his car was at a disadvantage due to the damage from the wreck, and Petty finished 13th, 16 laps down. With 5 races left in the season, Petty headed into North Wilkesboro, still looking to gain more spots in the point standings. Petty started 19th in the Holly Farms 400 and had a strong car once again, but the car wasn't strong enough to compete with the leaders. He ran in the top 10 and finished 9th, 3 laps down. Petty had a very poor qualifying run and started way back in 41st at Charlotte. Petty yet again had a very strong and fast Pontiac. Petty moved up through the field and finished 5th, 1 lap down, and Richard gained yet another spot in the standings, and this time was 7th in the points. With 3 races to go, Richard started 36th at Rockingham, and once again, the King had a very fast Pontiac. In the first 46 laps, Richard moved up from 36th to 19th, but as the race went on, the 43 lost speed and began to fade back. Petty finished in 17th, 6 laps down. Riverside was the second to last race of the season. Petty started 16th. Richard also had another strong and fast car. He managed to pull off a very strong 4th place finish. and gain another spot in the standings and move up to 6th. Now we made it to the final race of the 1987 season, the Atlanta Journal 500. Petty was holding on to his 6th place points position. Petty started very far back in 30th, and by lap 91 was running in 4th place. And then on lap 155, coming onto the front stretch, Richard was battling Jeff Bodine for 9th. When coming off of turn 4, Richard got loose and overcorrected. He made contact with Bodine. Bodine spun to the inside and hit the wall hard, and Petty again overcorrected and turned to the outside wall. Richard then got hit by the 4 of Rick Wilson. The 7 of Alan Kulwicki and the 50 of Greg Sachs barely made it through, but the 93 of Charlie Baker hit Richard hard in the left front fender. Richard climbed out of the car unhurt, but DNF'd in 30th. This DNF caused Petty to drop 2 positions to 8th in the final point standings. So that was the end of Richard's 1987 season. His 1987 stats were 9 top 5s, 14 top 10s, 38 laps led, and a 13.3 average finish. Comparing these results to his 1985 and 1986 seasons, 1987 was a huge improvement for the King and Petty enterprises. Every NASCAR fan knows that Richard Petty retired from driving in 1992, but how did those final seasons from 1988 to 1992 work out for him? So why don't we give those seasons a look? Join me next time for a 5-part series as we take a look at the final 5 seasons of Richard Petty's career.